we're going to have a little fireside chat. I don't have a fire easily to hand, so you'll have to imagine it for me. I'm delighted to be joined by Daniel McLaren from ArenaNet of Guild Wars and etc. etc. Daniel, how are you doing? How's things?
Hey, I'm well. How are you today?
Not bad at all.
Great.
So, we've got so many things to talk about. We had a quick chat over at the weekend. We probably could have carried on for about 2 days. So
turns out we're talkative.
Yeah, well, who'd have thought? So, do you want to start off just like letting people know who you are and what you do and what you've done?
So I'm obviously Daniel McLaren, the name in the corner there. I have been in some form of live operations and game design for the last 15 years. I started out in MMOs, and then I moved to mobile for a while. I was the lead live designer for Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes for several years, and then I recently came over to ArenaNet as the senior manager of live operations to help them build something new, and I'm getting to kind of implement a lot of the grand ideas I've always had about live operations. So I'm kind of functioning in a dual role as the lead game designer in the early phase, and then I'll switch over to the full-time live operations.
Sounds very much like following on Tabor's thinking that you're definitely being given that meaning and structure and impact aspect.
Yeah.
So, but what is live ops? I mean, I know we've had lots of people talking about it and lots of parallels, but for you, what does live ops actually mean?
I mean, there's all the fancy stuff that people talk about, but at the end of the day, it's just serving your player. That's really what it is. We're in a service job. A lot of people get into this job and they think like, oh, I want to make games because games really changed my life, or I really like this thing, or, I've played 1,000 hours and I want to go and work for this particular company. And I think it becomes a thing where it's more about serving yourself. But the reality is, it's like, just because we're not standing in a drive-through window handing a bag of food to somebody doesn't mean we're not in customer service or player service. And you see games fail all the time because they do what they want, not what is right for the player. So for me, live ops is just saying, who are our players? Why are they our players? What are we doing right? What are we doing wrong? And what's the next step for us to make sure that
seems to be you're focusing on kind of like realizing that the game is theirs. They bought it, or they've invested their time in it. And
that's a twofold statement. Like,
okay, go for it.
It is theirs. Yep. It is theirs, and it belongs to them. But it's ours as well. We're still stewards, and so there's this interesting dichotomy where there are times we have had to make decisions that were right for the people working on it, to sustain it, to like. It's hard to say because people just want to think everything should be super altruistic all the time. But the reality is, you have anywhere between 50 to 200 people who they have families, they have futures that they're planning for, they have things that they want to do. And so, making revenue, making sure that there's money in the bank, surviving, that's important. And then the live aspect is balancing that and not turning into like, how do we squeeze blood from a stone, into how do we also make sure that the game will live for a long time, isn't being undermined by immediate emotional desires, but still capitalizes on making players feel really good about it. So it's a double-edged sword.
I think that's. I mean, this is why it matters. Why live ops is about creating the context for me, anyways. The context in which players who love the game already can get what they want from it and appreciate what they're getting. And that appreciation comes in the form of them wanting to buy more things that they like, that they want. And I think if we don't get that cycle right, like you say, if we try and squeeze blood out of a stone, all we do is make the situation more difficult, don't we?
Or get really cynical, right? I mean, I think that's the thing is, there's so many people, we talked about this when we had our call, there's so many people who get into the games industry as investment, or they look at it, they go like, oh, video games made more money than movies or books or music. I'm going to start a game company, or I'm going to invest in a game company, I'm going to make all this money. And the I think the core problem is when you look at film and music, and I'm sure I'm gonna ruffle somebody's feathers with the statement, but I've worked in the music industry, and I've worked here, and the film and music industry have formulas, very specific formulas that they follow, and they know how to generate. There are people who are just like, do this, do this, do this. It's produced this way. It's done this way. And they understand what resonates with people. Games are as much tech as they are art. And so you enter this thing where it's like, unlike Microsoft Word, where you look at this list and you go like, you have to be able to print, you have to be able to check grammar, all this stuff, we can build that. And there's a creative aspect to the UX experience. But in games, you can check every box and build a technically perfect game, and it can crater, which we see all the time. You can build a game that's technically really rough, but resonates so deeply with people. And that's the hardest part. There's no formula that really tells you, oh man, this is the magic sauce. We build in the beginning, and then we deploy and we go, oh, this is really resonating. And then you'll shift gears or
we can't just make the 4 chords that every song that hits is a hit.
Well, not with that attitude. Come on, buddy. No, yeah.
No, exactly. So, okay. Yeah. So, obviously, we've gone from the era of box product. We've seen people moving to free to play or not, and pay up front still does operate. Why are companies looking at live ops? What is important from a player point of view for it, but also what's important from the company point of view?
So, there's a handful of avenues for this, but I think there's 2 primary divisions, right? The first is, hey, normally when we build a box product and we sell it, there's this 2-week lifespan where it's like our revenue is built in this 2 weeks, unless you're Grand Theft Auto, and then you just have this apparently eternal revenue stream, which is amazing. But if you're not that, it's that, hey, ship it. That's why there's always kind of been this aggressive anti-piracy for the first 2 weeks, sort of a push, like get as many units sold as you can, because you really need to make back that investment. And it might be longer than 2 weeks, but you kind of get what I'm saying. Yeah. And so a lot of people who have come up in that model have a hard time seeing live ops beyond, we no longer have to do the traditional expansion pack. We can do DLC, so smaller kind of stuff. And they see that as kind of their live plan of like, hey, you can buy a season pass, and this is going to come out, and this is going to come out, and this is going to come out, which is fine. I think I actually don't have anything wrong with it as long as the DLC feels valuable to the player, right? Is giving the player what they want. But then the other side of it is, I think kind of the school that I came up into, because I came up through MMOs, and that's what I have just generally always worked on. The concept was, well, no, day one means the start of actual, we just developed to get it to this point, and now what we're doing beyond this. And of course, MMOs still had that when I started. MMOs still had the like, hey, we'll sell the box for $60, and then we're going to sell an expansion, and that'll be $60, and then it has evolved through this kind of mobile influence, a positive mobile influence, which is, wait a minute, what if the game is just something that people always want to play, and we just continue to provide them offerings to be a part of it? I think Guild Wars 2, which was, I did not work on that. I wasn't part of that team, but one of the things that really set them apart was their buy it for $60, and then, there's no subscription fee. We'll have this gem store. And that really was kind of one of the first major titles to introduce this this new revenue. And I believe Kristen Cox, who's on another one of the talks in here. So if you get a chance, go and see Kristen Cox's talks. She worked for ArenaNet.
Totally, yeah. So
yeah, she's fantastic.
Yeah, she is.
So I think those are the kind of the two schools, and I think they're very rapidly merging.
I think so. I mean, we refer to it as a hybrid model when we're talking to investors who are interested in it, because I think that, increasingly that need to be able to think about the shadow of the game post-release is so critical. I do have a slight, I know you don't have a particular problem with DLC. I do. The reason I do is because it's almost always too late. People talk about, great DLC, fantastic. I love DLC.
Right.
But if you don't release it early enough, you basically have no momentum left because everyone's played the game, finished it, and gone on to something else. If you release
Right.
it too early, you irritate people because they think it should have been in the original game, and all you've done is cut the game down.
Right. Yeah, it becomes this concept of like, oh, we cut this thing. I'm actually in full agreement with you there. I think I'll pick on Xenoblade Chronicles 2 for a second here. I loved that game for the Switch. I thought it was great. And I was really hyped for their DLC. By the time their final DLC pack came out, which was like a full second kind of game attached to it, it was already a year down the road, and I just wasn't into it. I was like, well, this game doesn't have the kind of replayability for me that I was going to sit and play frequently enough that when that final DLC pack, which I was excited for at the beginning, it didn't resonate with me. And that's I think that's really what I see DLC as, especially in that regard, especially like these, oh, hey, we're going to release these small things and then this kind of big thing at the end. It is really just a shot for, okay, now it's the definitive edition. We'll release it and we'll get a second bump in sales, which is a fine tactic.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong, there are some games where it has worked for me. I mean, particularly Fallout games, I just wanted to play.
Oh,
but, over
New Vegas, yeah, exactly.
But a year down the line, I've probably played 1,000 games. I mean, okay, maybe I'm a bit of an exception, but trying to think about like, for example, I know Breath of the Wild is an amazing game. I have tried 3 separate occasions to play it, and every time I have to go and restart from the start because I've forgotten all the nuances of play.
Yeah, I think that's why I highly favor the seasonal model that Path of Exile has really kind of been pioneering. And it's something that I think that or some evolution of that is really kind of the next phase of where we're moving. It's the thing that I'm focusing on as well, where you say, hey, there's always a standard mode. You can always play. You never lose your wealth. Everything you've ever earned is always going to be there. You can play the game how you want in it. But every season, there's this kind of fresh restart. There's a fresh mechanic. There's something fresh happening. And you can come in. You can play. Everybody's on equal ground at the start. And it has here's the thing that I love, and this feels contrary to a lot of what I was taught coming up in this industry and conversations that I've sat in boardrooms and heard. I love the fact that Path of Exile signals to the player, hey, it's okay to stop playing right now. Go play Cyberpunk 2077 for 6 months and then come back when the next season starts if you want. There's always a point to re-enter the game. There's always a point to learn what's going on. Now, I'll pick on them. I love them, but they have the worst new user experience and the worst learning curve there. But
yeah,
it shows that anybody can get back in, even when you're burned out. I've got 2,500 plus hours in that game. And there are times where I take...
No, it's time one.
yeah. I mean, there are times where I take 6, 8, 9 months off, and then I come back and I'm hardcore for a period. So I think I think we'll see that evolve. And I think that's going to be a core space for people who are thinking about what does it mean to have my game live and to not fall into the traditional MMO problem of, oh man, we have all this content nobody can use or touch or see. We have to accelerate them through, etc.
Yeah. No, exactly. I think that's really key. I think seasonality like that is so interesting. Particularly, I think it's also an area that mobile can learn from, PC and console in general. But I think particularly though, it's the frequency of that. So, should that be weekly? Should that be monthly? Should that be quarterly? I think each game is going to be very different, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that's that is the key. If you look at Path of Exile, they've settled into a quarterly structure. And I personally very much favor this structure because I like the concept of 3 quarters where lighter mechanics are being introduced, something that a smaller team can handle while the full power of the Death Star can be focused on building that Q4 big DLC that's going to define the next cycle of story, of content, of antagonists, etc. Like I really think that's clever because they've done it in a way where they're like, we know we can develop in this window of time and it's going to work for us. So for me, that's what I would start with. And then looking at your players, looking at the response, looking at your content pipeline, your team size, etc., you can start to adjust. Too long and it just gets boring and there's no reason to come back. Too short and you're going to put yourself, and you don't. And the other thing is, we just saw this with Destiny in their announcement earlier this week. The game director, Luke, just apologized for the whole FOMO, fear of missing out element, that he was like, hey, I take blame for that. I'm sorry. We want to try to get rid of that FOMO experience. And I do too. I don't want people to ever feel like you're missing out. And the nice thing is seasons is you can say, if you don't want to participate in a season, don't worry. Everything's still going to come to you. It just might be, you're going to be a season behind, but you'll still get it. You could still participate in it, and it's not going to, you're not going to have this detrimental experience. And I really, really favor that. I feel like giving the player options is really what live operations is about.
I'm not against fear of missing out per se. What I am against is when it becomes a big stick to beat you.
Sure. Well, when it's the core experience, right? Yeah. Like if FOMO is your core experience, you fundamentally fall into the trap of anybody who comes into the game 365 days later is perpetually behind and can never be on even if they're hardcore. You're going to have to buy an account, right, off of one of these black market sites where you're like, well, if I want all of this stuff that I didn't even know about the game, I didn't even have a chance, and I think that I have found the best way to deal with content that might normally fall into the FOMO category is to actually gate that content behind harder challenges, to say it's always going to be there, but probably only 2% are going to get it. Yeah, exactly. So I think there's a way to balance this. I think that,
Well, I think actually I'm going to go for a mobile version, which I think is an interesting one. So Subway Surfers has a lighter touch version of it, which is you go to a city and you explore the city. So you go to, Rome or whatever, you get Rome-based items by doing it. And then you're not going to see that again for a year.
Yeah.
But when you do, it becomes available for everybody. It's fresh for the people who've not done it. And and there's always new stuff in that space.
Yeah.
And I think that way of thinking, whether it's the right specific, but that way of thinking, actually, we can re-energize all this stuff that we've made.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I think it is highly dependent on your audience. And that's just it. Like, if I was building a hardcore, Souls-like, hyper-aggressive game, then perhaps something like where it's like, hey, it doesn't come back or at all. Or maybe it's only achievable because we're specifically targeting these hardcore players. Like, I think that absolutely works. If you have a game more, I don't want to say casual because I don't necessarily mean it that way, but if the game approach is, hey, we're a little bit more laid back. It's not necessarily about this hardcore grind. There might be a grind, but it's more on your turn. Then it becomes a time thing, I think, is where you lean into that. I think it's just, that's the part, I guess that's the part about live operations that is important to kind of communicate to people. And that is, it's about your player base. The right answer isn't something that I'm telling you right now, oh, you should do seasons and you should have no FOMO and you should do this thing. Like, that's all wrong answers if it's not right for your audience. Like, a good live team, a good game team, period, is thinking about retention above all else.
Yeah.
Because I told this to you, I don't care about ARPU, because you could have a $1 million ARPU and have 10 people in your game. Okay, great, awesome. That's not doing anything for me. I care about it only in the relationship of retention. And my primary focus is, how do I convert people who come through our game into retained good players? And how do I keep those players happy when there's so many other things they could be doing Their time is valuable to me. I want to respect that. And I have a hard time working with individuals who are cynical about the player's time and investment.
Absolutely agree. So what does the game need to have to be able to do that? You know, what is it about a game that makes you go, yep, we can make that work?
That's such a broad question because every game is largely different. It's the thing that keeps Red Dead Online connected with people the same as, you know, a mobile game. I think foundationally, from a non-player facing perspective, and a bit from a player facing, it's the pipeline behind the scenes, right? It's we planned for this to have a live component or to be rooted in live operations. It is that we prepared from a design perspective, a progression system, an economy system, because the thing that I see that really hurts a lot of games is no real reward planning, no real progression planning, no real long-term. And so you wind up with like 5,000 currencies in the game and you have to keep expiring them or converting them or, you know, and that's a very, very common problem. And then a tool set, right? Like I've been at companies where I have literally asked basic things like, what's our retention over the first 60 days? And the question and the answer comes back is like, I don't know. Like, so a data system that you can ask the right questions. And because, so I was listening a bit to the last talk, and it's like, yeah, put everybody into, you know, handle customer tickets for a week or a month or whatever. But that's a dangerous thing because now you're dealing with anecdotal evidence, right? And anecdotal evidence can be hyper deceptive, as we've seen, you know, in the EverQuest days with the message boards and, you know, even early WoW days with the message boards, where you have a very narrow minority who's saying things like, it should be this. And then you do it and you see your numbers go down. And you're like, I gave you that. Why? I have always used customer tickets, Reddit, forums, etc., as where there's smoke, there might be fire. And I will say, oh, this is something I have never even thought to ask in the data space. So what is this? What's happening? Let me go and see if I can extrapolate from data. Is this impacting retention? Is this impacting the primary committed user group or whatever it is? So I think having a plan from the start, what is this game? What's it supposed to be at live? And having the tools in place is how you get to that spot.
Yeah, no, totally agree. And I think it's actually interesting you mentioned EverQuest. I remember having a chat with John Smedley when I was at home, and they had a massive tool called Sewing at the back end. I don't know if you remember that, which was actually looking at what people were doing. So they could see there was something going wrong in a game by looking at an accelerometer showing how many people were currently in that space. Little things like that kind of having the ability to ask the right questions, I think, is so key.
And to get the right answers. So a lot of times you can ask the right question and data can give you the wrong answer. And so it's really important to have experienced analysts and a data scientist on board. And when I say experience, I don't just mean, hey, they know how to write the queries and pull the queries. That is obviously a very key element. But I am really in favor of hiring analysts who are empathetic, people focused, and so that they can challenge backwards and go, man, that seems kind of, I don't know if that's the question. I don't know if that's the right question because of our players are like this, right? I want to surround us with as many empathetic and people focused developers as possible, because we all fall in and out of, you know, we all have good days and bad days. And I want as many people who have the best interests of the player at heart around, so that everybody can challenge everybody. Like, whoa, why are we doing that? That feels cynical, you know, and help us ask the right questions and help us divine the right answers from all of the data, the anecdotal and the hard data, because sometimes hard data misses what the anecdotal will show you. So
I think sentiment analysis in some form, whether it's
valuable.
Listening to anecdotals or actually asking survey questions or actually doing some machine learning, doesn't really matter. What matters is we listen to people.
Absolutely.
But I think this is when I remember Ben Cousins when he was doing Battlefield Online. Was it Battlefield
Right.
Online? I think it was. They were going to put in-app purchases for weapons in, and it got completely destroyed by the community. The very same people bought those weapons.
Yeah.
They spend the most money.
Yeah, and it's tough because it is hard to. I feel for a lot of established teams who came up in a traditional mindset trying to adjust to live, and I even feel bad for people who are in live being afraid to kill the golden goose, right? Where you look at something, you're like, I have a revenue stream and it's working, but I can't grow it. And I'm afraid if I make this decision, I'm going to not only not do what we were hoping to do, but I'm going to actually kill our primary survival stream. It is not easy. And I have found myself in positions where I've had to say, like, I hope, you're just relying on your experience. You go like, I know that this is the right thing. So instead of like, dropping the bomb on the players, let's see if we can roll this out slowly and try to come up with a plan. What happens if it does impact our primary revenue stream, et cetera. So I can completely empathize with that situation.
So we're about out of time. I'm going to just ask you the one last question. What is the one thing that you would say to somebody to demystify live ops for a developer?
Get somebody in at the beginning who is people focused and live focused. That's a hard thing to do right now. There's not a lot of us out there. Not that I'm not elevating myself. It's just like it's a relatively newly understood field, and there's still a lot of exploration that's happening in it. And so getting somebody in early who is a part of the design process and the game production process to say, why is this progression loop this way? What is this design focus? How is this going to support our 500 or our 2500? It's just like anything else. How can you make design better? Well, hiring good design staff, right? Having respect for your people, listening to them, being a part of it. Like, there's no secret sauce. It comes through, I think, experience, mistakes, successes, and finding somebody who's got that under their belt is invaluable, which is like a no duh, right? Like, if I could just find the best designer who's got all this great experience. Yeah, no duh. I get it.
Yeah.
But there's no shortcut to hard work.
No, exactly. I mean, for me, it's basically having somebody who loves the player. I mean, I know that sounds cliche and kind of like, wet, but it's not. I think actually, like you say, you've got to be people focused. You've got to give a crap about what experience the players are going to have, number one. And only through that do you get retention, and only through retention do you get revenue. On that note, thank you so much. That was fantastic.
My pleasure.
Thanks, Sam. Great talking to you.